well, let's get started. Welcome to today's session. Thank you for taking the time out to be here and learn a little bit more about this crazy AI thing. Today, we're going to talk about preparing your data for AI. This is the 5th session in our Strategic AI Readiness series, and it shares some content or at least principles with our last session about data governance. This is a very practical, focused session on how to organize and manage your data in Microsoft 365, how to capture knowledge to make AI more accurate and useful. This is really the organizational level. A lot of the stuff we've talked about up till session 4 was about individual contributions and how you can use AI individually better. Now we're talking more about your organization and how the company can leverage this tool in a great way. So we'll start by talking about why data preparation matters. We'll move into some best practices for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and then we'll finish by talking about governance a little bit more and some quick start checklists and a case reflection here. So today's goal is really simple. You're going to have clear steps your team can take right away to make AI more effective while reducing risk and rework. Was there a question here? I lost my chat window. 1 second. There we go. No, not yet. Okay. If you've been to any of the other sessions, you know by now, my name is Andrew Rivet. I'm a VCIO at Smart Dolphins. I've been here about 13 years, and my main role is to talk about business IT strategy and roadmaps. And no surprise to anyone, the topic lately is generative AI. This is something that clients are bringing to me more often than any other tool I am familiar with, just because of the enormous potential and how quickly this tool is taking over every industry, or at least impacting every industry. So there's a ton of potential here, and I'm really happy to share this with you. Smart Dolphins, if you're not familiar with us, is a managed service provider, the leading managed service provider in BC. And for 25 years, we've been helping organizations stay... I lost my place, sorry. I got off my script, I don't like reading. We've been helping organizations use technology to not only stay secure and operational, but to make the most of technology in their industry. Our approach is proactive, people-focused, and tailored to align IT with business success. One way we live this mission is through training events like this one. We believe that empowering people with knowledge is just as important, or even more important, as having the right technology in place. That definitely sounded like I read it, because I did. We do have a bit of housekeeping before we get rolling here. This session is being recorded, so if you participate, you may end up on our YouTube channel, just to be aware. There is a handout link in the chat that you can follow along with or use to remember all of the cool stuff I'm going to share with you in this session. This is an interactive session. I love questions. It makes me feel a little more comfortable, but also provides more value to the audience. So please do that. If anything comes up, you can throw that in the chat, or you can... I don't know if that was for me. Or you can use the Q&A session there.
Yeah, you haven't shared your slides yet.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
That was for me. Well, you didn't miss anything too important. Yeah, so there is a handout in the chat there. This is an interactive session, so please use the chat for questions, or you can use the Q&A. I will answer them as best I can as I go along, but there will be a Q&A section at the end. And if you have any questions related to AI, I'm happy to answer those. Don't be shy. It doesn't have to be related to today's content. There's always lots of time at the end, and we'll make sure we get to those questions for you there. We also have some polls. Those will pop up right within Teams. And one last new note here is that AI note takers are not permitted in our session here today. They will be removed. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to us through email and we can give you a bit more of an explanation there. Moving along, our session today is going to start with preparing organizational data, documenting structure and best practices, capturing organizational knowledge, and then talking about our next steps and what's going on in session 6 here. So getting into the detail, what we're talking about today is preparing your data for AI. Very similar to our last session, but that was focused on security and data governance. Today, we're talking more about how to organize your data for the best possible outcome. Efficiency and lack of rework is really the key here. This is all work that would have been valuable in the past, just like data governance. Having well-organized, clean data helps all kinds of workflows, but it's even more important now that we're inviting these extremely capable tools that are also kind of dumb into our environment. Essentially, what we're doing is we're laying the groundwork for your company to use AI effectively. And some feedback that we've been hearing about AI, especially as I've been doing more of these sessions, is that there's some skeptics out there. I think Some people have really leaped into this with both feet, but people are finding in some cases, I can do this faster if I just do it myself. I have to do a lot of rework. The output didn't quite make sense. And I'll even acknowledge this was my early experience as well. I didn't have a lot of the fundamental skills I needed, like the prompt engineering we talked about a couple of sessions ago, and well-organized data. So I ran into all sorts of challenges, and it really felt frustrating rather than empowering. And so if you want to get this rolled out for your organization to integrate it into your day-to-day work, you need to make sure that what the AI is working with is clean and organized. Copilot is the main target we're talking about today, but these principles do apply to any of the tools that access your data. So if we're talking about SharePoint and Copilot, we could be talking about ChatGPT and Google Drive as well. Just the terminology will be different. And these are the things that you need to get the most out of these models for your business. Anyone can run around with a ChatGPT license or even just the free version, but the real efficiency for an organization is going to come from integrating these tools with the data that your organization already has. And that's why this matters, is that AI depends on your data. Copilot uses your user context. It can see everything that you can see. And we talked about this in terms of governance and data security, but the quality of that data matters too. Garbage in, garbage out. You know which version of that executive report, new, updated, final one, is the right version of that report, the one you worked on last. AI doesn't. And so it's going to bring in data from all 8 different copies of that document that exist in the 3 different folders. And so what you end up with is poor results from disorganized files. You want to make sure that you're archiving the data that needs to be archived. And so well-structured data can have a huge impact and reduce the manual intervention required to set up the AI tools to refine their output. You're not just dragging and dropping files into your ChatGPT window anymore and saying, hey, work with this. You're telling Copilot, hey, look for files related to this topic, and let's build an SOP together. At the end of the day, what this means is that data readiness is adoption readiness. So you want to invest up front for your best return on investment. And I want to do a little bit of a digression here into a topic that I haven't heard talked about a lot, but it is something that's shifting as far as modern workflows go. There is a paradigm change from working with structured folders and more of a search-first approach. Microsoft and others are shifting their user interfaces. When you hit the Windows key, you get the start menu, you start typing, you're searching. You open up SharePoint, there's a search bar at the top. It's the first thing that your cursor goes into. In your browser even, you don't just type www.yahoo.com anymore. You can type Yahoo and search Google for Yahoo. It's kind of like the default mode. And a lot of this is because of user behavior that different organizations have noticed. And so the idea is that it's faster to search for something than it is to remember where you put it. And so it might, it might seem redundant to do all this work up front, but it actually means that a clean foundation for your data is even more important. A good system for organizing your data is useful, but the clean data portion is extremely critical in this case, because AI is relying on those search results, but it lacks the specific context that lives in your head about which of those files are the right one, or which data might be outdated, or, oh yeah, I forgot to delete that. And really, your company's probably suffering the effects of this poor data organization already. It's one of the big complaints that I hear is that SharePoint search is useless. But the reality is people are searching for a document and they're getting those 8 different versions, and they got to click and go back and search again and click and go back and search again. It's just to find the right file. That's the actual issue. SharePoint search is really awesome. So if you don't think SharePoint search is awesome, this session is for you. Now let's start talking about some practical detail. So these challenges really come down to the file version chaos I mentioned already. Having really large, complex spreadsheets. Any SMB is probably using spreadsheets for a very large portion of their operations and tracking metrics and all sorts of things. Inconsistent document formatting is another issue that you'll find. It can slow down your AI and the usefulness of the output that you get. Siloed knowledge. So data that might relate to multiple teams is just in one team's SharePoint site or one team's sort of teams group, teams site. You want to make sure that that's organized well. And then legacy permissions, organizing or exposing information, as we mentioned in our governance session last week or a couple weeks ago. And so each of these challenges really weakens the reliability of AI in practical use. When people are starting to run into these things, you might pay the $500, give someone a Copilot license, and they say, this really isn't giving me what I need. I can do this faster. So we want to work on improving that. So number one, as far as principles go, is archiving and removing old, unused information to reduce the clutter. This is a good thing for the search, but especially for AI accuracy. Similarly, eliminating duplicates. So you want to get rid of those multiple different copies of the files. SharePoint has a really great file versioning that you can rely on instead of making another copy of the file. If you just click on the title of a document inside of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever, you could actually click version history and see all the different edits to that document that have happened over time. And you can restore them or make a copy of them or anything like that very easily. Give that a try if you haven't. You also want to centralize your storage. So things that relate to everyone in the company should be in an all company site. Things that only relate to individual teams should only be in specific team sites, and only specific people should be in those teams. Sounds really simple, but surprisingly, very, very few organizations are actually set up this way at our scale. And then you want to standardize your naming conventions. So consistent naming of files, folders, tags, metadata, these are all going to have an impact on searching, especially, but the AI generation quality. And so now that we've talked a little bit about the principles, let's get into some of the specifics. And everyone's journey here is going to be a little bit different. Oh, we've got a question. Oh, chat here. Can you repeat how to check the version of a file? So if you're using SharePoint, let me see if I can pull one up that doesn't have, here we go. There's actually a sample data. If you click up here, click version history. This one won't have any versions because I just downloaded this one yesterday, but well, it does. You can see all the different versions. So for a file that you've had for a long time, you can see much more history than this file has since 3 o'clock yesterday. Hopefully that answers that. Yeah, so the practical steps. And like I said, everyone's journey here is going to be a little bit different. But this is my recommendation based on some experience I've had helping organizations get through this process. The most important thing is having a team, even if it's just 2 people. You want to establish accountability. This isn't necessarily fun work. There are certain types of people that will find this entertaining, but most people are going to find this a bit of a slog. And so you really got to remember what you're trying to do here, and you want to make sure you've got an accountability buddy to help you get through this process. It will take longer than you think. You want to be persistent. Maybe more important than having a team is just making sure that you're actually following through on it. You want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You want to be thinking about, I'm not just renaming this file. I'm not just hitting archive 15, 30, 20,000 times today. I am helping my organization leverage AI to become more efficient and work faster. You want to leverage tools to get this done quickly and efficiently. So the first one I'm going to share is SharePoint archiving. I don't see this enabled very often, but people tend to be data hoarders. And so if you don't want to just hit the delete button, it is scary to do that, especially if you don't have a 365 backup tool, which you should have. Give us a shout if you don't. You want to enable SharePoint archiving, and you can archive your files. It still counts against your storage, but in most cases, that's not going to be a big issue. But it allows you to keep a copy of that file in an archive folder you can get later, but it doesn't impact your search. So when you go searching for files, you're only getting live data. You can go looking for the archive later if you need to, but you're not getting multiple versions of the same document. And you don't have to be brave enough to hit delete on something that you're like, well, I might want this in 6 months. You probably don't, but that's still hard. The other thing you want to do is use deduplication tools. There isn't anything built into SharePoint directly, but there are third-party tools that can help you out with this that will link into your SharePoint and help you identify places. This is probably the number one issue, is files that look quite similar or have very similar content, but are actually different versions and that sort of thing. So if you want, you can use Power Automate to kind of build your own deduplication tool. You can use even Copilot within Power Automate, or just manually to surface these files that are duplicated or look like they might be quite old, or relate to things that the company doesn't do anymore. If you have a Copilot license, you can just start asking these kinds of questions, and it'll look at all the data you can see and start showing you things that might be relevant. And the last thing is the consistent messaging. You really want your team to understand why this matters, why you're encouraging them to go through their data and delete the 15 different versions of that executive summary that they wrote. It's because you got to clean up the kitchen before you cook. You're not going to cook a great meal in a messy kitchen. This is the foundational work that will enable your AI adoption. It's how you build that leverage. Not all the work is going to be exciting the way that GPT can be, but this is how you're going to build organizational strength with AI, not just individual strength with AI. So any more questions here? And so let's kind of pivot now from organizational-wide data to some specifics. These are going to be more tips and tricks, not as impactful as having sort of a clean data structure, but it will improve the results that you get from AI, especially Copilot. And many of these things, just like before, are really just using your tools well. They were useful before AI came along, but they're even more important now. We'll start by talking a little bit about formatting documents in Word. Then we'll move into making Excel files more easily interpreted by AI. And then we'll improve your PowerPoint slide decks for AI processing. Starting with Word, these are sort of how to make a Word document AI friendly and make it useful, or at least easily interpreted by AI. AI can interpret just about anything, but if you want clarity and efficiency, especially in things people are going to be using all the time, you want to be structuring these well. The first tip here is to use headings. So if you don't know about styles and outline view, I'd highly recommend it. It's really useful even outside of this AI context, but that's definitely something to find some more training on. I believe we even cover that in our sessions. You want to populate your document properties and metadata, like filling in the title, subjects, or using tags within SharePoint to help your search tools correctly index the documents. I can demonstrate some of the benefits of this within our own SharePoint site a little bit later here. You want to keep your text concise, so long, meandering paragraphs are harder to parse than something concise and simple. And you want to use tables or lists for structured content. Again, you can even use Copilot to interpret some data that you've written, turn it into a table so that the next time that gets processed by AI, it's more efficient than it was for it to parse that again, sort of in real time, if that makes any sense. Any questions about that before I move on? Next, we're going to talk about Excel, and this is one that may trip a lot of people up. Having many years of experience supporting businesses at our scale, Excel runs a vast number of business systems, and many of those spreadsheets can be very hard for Copilot to interpret. I've actually had some direct challenges with this in the past, and so here's some tips you can use to make those spreadsheets a little bit easier to understand. Rather than having sort of one gigantic organization-wide master spreadsheet that does everything, if you want it to be interpreted by AI, you want to keep it down to a single purpose per sheet in a workbook. And again, a very narrow focus as much as possible within an individual workbook. When you have a set of data, you want the first row to be your headers. You don't want blank columns before, making it look pretty with all sorts of formatting. These can really help human interpretation, but if you can avoid it, it really makes it easier for AI to interpret this data instead. You want to use consistent formatting. Again, if you have multiple header rows within the same sheet, or you're using sort of fancy charts and everything all over the place in a single worksheet, that's going to be harder for the AI to interpret than something that's very simple and consistent. And again, the most important thing here is formatting that data as a table. Copilot often will refuse to do anything useful with a set of data unless it's in a table format. So if you aren't using tables within Excel, I'd say that's another thing that you might want to find some training on. It's a very, very useful tool, can do automatic formatting and the sort and filter and everything. It's a very awesome feature. And then you want to separate your raw data, your calculations, and your summaries. You can make sort of one master sheet that has everything on it, but it'll be easier for AI to interpret if you're kind of breaking those out into different sheets within the same workbook. Next, we're going to talk about PowerPoint. And so PowerPoint decks aren't just for live presentations. They're often knowledge assets that AI tools can search, summarize, and analyze later. If you prepare them well, you can make this even the reliability of those outputs even better. And so these are just some core practices you can take, again, useful even without AI, but you want to have descriptive slide titles on every slide. Generic labels like slide 3 will give AI nothing to work with effectively. Your speaker notes can be interpreted by Copilot as well and can really help give more context to the session. You can kind of imagine that between the slide content, the speaker notes, and the transcript from a session, you can get a pretty good summary of what happened within a session. Copilot can pull that all together for you automatically if you have access to all of that data. And the consistent layouts and formatting. Maybe this slideshow isn't the best for that, kind of jump around a bunch, but again, it'll make it easier for the tool to interpret when you are putting out data in PowerPoint format. And so the key takeaway here is that treat your PowerPoint files like structured data sources. If they're clean, then AI can interpret them with far more accuracy. Next, we're going to move on to something that your AI can't infer on its own. This is your organizational knowledge. This means documenting your mission, values, structures, and processes so AI has the context it needs to be useful. And so we kind of talked about this a bit on a micro level when we were doing the prompt engineering piece of a session a couple of weeks ago here. But it's really important that you give AI context in order to get accurate outputs. What we're talking about now, rather than sort of this micro individual prompt context, is organizational context, the things that define your unique business. This is information that might live in people's heads or scattered in documents around your organization, but it's important contextual detail that will improve the answers that your AI will give. And I'll give you a demo of that in just a moment here. And these aren't things that are commonly written down for many organizations in the SMB space. They're typically well known and understood by people within the company, but we're not hiring a person, we're bringing in an AI to help us instead. So it doesn't always have that information. And even rough descriptions of these things can be really helpful as long as they exist and Copilot can actually access them. And so what we're talking about here is your mission and values, documenting, your core objectives and your strategic objectives that provide the AI with context for decision-making recommendations, sort of the unique way that your organization accomplishes what it's going to accomplish rather than generic answers that people can get from any tool. You want to provide it with information about your structure and your roles. And there's multiple ways that you can do this. It can be as simple as a Word doc that describes everybody's role or the structure of the organization. You can draw it in a Visio diagram that it can ingest, or you can do it right within Microsoft 365 using Delve. Look into this if you haven't already, but you can assign roles, managers, team leads, overall structure, org charts, and Copilot can ingest this data for context when it's responding to the prompts that people are giving it. And the last thing here is your process, workflows, and policy. Much of this probably exists, but maybe some of it is a printed policy that gets photocopied and signed and filed when somebody gets onboarded, or maybe it's just something, an SOP that's stapled on the wall in your production floor. But if it isn't in SharePoint and well structured, Copilot doesn't know it exists and it can't respond based on that information. And so I want to jump into a quick demo of how this could work for you. Wait 2 seconds. Will Copilot learn and remember organizational knowledge, or do you have to teach it every conversation? Well, it depends on how you're using Copilot, but the data that is stored within your SharePoint environment will impact the kinds of answers that it gives. And so it does have to ingest those documents. What I'm going to show you in a second here is a Copilot agent that's been sort of pre-prompted with some of our organizational data, but then also has access to a bunch of context that it can bring in situationally, if that answers your question. And so we've been on our own journey of cleaning up our environment. You might have guessed that much of what I'm describing today is based on direct experience. And as we're spooling up our own AI practice, we've discovered some of the challenges. As I mentioned, my own experience early on, there was difficulties, and it's taken time to get this tool to be useful for me, but I am more efficient now than before I went through that struggle of figuring out how to use the tool well. And so while this is going on, we've actually set up our own sort of dedicated site. Thanks to Joe, he's actually put a lot of the work in to make this happen. For anyone who's worked with him on SharePoint before, is a dedicated site to hold our company data, like our onboarding documentation, company policies, core values, mission statement, strategic objectives, SOPs, all that kind of stuff. And then we've layered on what's called a Copilot agent, which works a little bit differently. So this isn't the per user license that everyone gets sort of access to the full Copilot experience. This is a agent that people can interact with. It's a pay-as-you-go model, and it can be given access to some or all of your data individually. It works a little bit differently than the per-user one. It doesn't get access to sort of like your emails and your Teams messages and all that other personal data, but it can act on your SharePoint information. And the whole company can access it. And so what we've done with this agent is we've pointed it just at this site, and we've trained it on a prompt that instructs it only to use our company data. It doesn't make anything up or infer anything. It's trying to avoid hallucinations, which can happen. It doesn't go searching on the internet, and it'll always provide links to source material. So we have kind of a handy agent that we can ask company-related questions to, and we get grounded answers. Rather than having to ask a team leader or manager for every little thing we can think of, we can sort of guide ourselves here. And so I've got a super contrived scenario here about a colleague. Let me copy and paste my prompt here. Who is wearing khaki shorts, a short-sleeved shirt, and some sandals at work today. And I'm asking Copilot, how does this fit within our dress code? And Copilot has felt really slow when I was practicing with this today, so I apologize in advance. So I feel like you might be underdressed. How does this fit? So it gives me an overview of what the dress code would be. This is a summary. So the short sleeve button-up shirt's likely acceptable if it's neat and professional. Khaki shorts are potentially problematic if considered too short or too casual. I'd say that's not the best answer because most khaki shorts are pretty well fine as far as length. But the last one, sandals not permitted due to the ban on open-toed footwear. And so it ingested our SD dress code with a link right here. If I want to see specifically, like, Copilot's not just making this up, I can open that file and look at it directly. It's saying if you'd like help drafting a friendly message or want to clarify this with leadership, I can help. So what I'm going to say instead is, can you suggest how I can talk to them about it based in our values? Again, has access to a document here that's called Smart Dolphin's Core Values and has a bunch of statements about our core values that it can then use to process an answer that I could use to talk to this person. And so it's got a couple of specific things it's talking about here. Is assuming positive intent is one piece of our core values, giving and receiving constructive feedback. So offer your perspective with humility and openness. And then it gives us some more generic support about how to approach this conversation. And then, you can continue this prompt. And again, it's giving me a link to our core values document right there. And you say, can you give me some bullet point notes on this? And it'll simplify that down. Again, a little bit. I think I actually could have asked that question a little bit more specifically. I was hoping for something that would help me guide the conversation with my colleague, but that would be a simple request. And since we're kind of flying through this presentation, I might show another example here. Let's go to a new chat here, and I'm going to say, can you help me make a checklist for end of day to ensure my time entry is up to par? And again, because it has access to our onboarding documentation, our time entry policies and procedures, it can run through. And so I'll let this work in the background. I'll pull it back up in a minute here since it will take a couple of minutes. But hopefully that's just kind of a small demo of what you can do when you have well-organized data and you have the context of your organization. You're not just getting generic answers that say like, well, maybe sandals aren't okay in your organization, or, khaki shorts aren't generally considered business casual. You get something that is specific to your organization without having to put in the, dress code into ChatGPT, which would be kind of a waste of time. It'd be faster just to read it. And so this slide is designed to talk about what happens when good prep is in place. Good practices aren't going to guarantee that you get perfect results. AI is always going to need that human review, like we've talked about before, but it's going to significantly improve the reliability and usefulness of the outputs, which will translate into uptake. You're going to have a mix of willingness to adopt AI within your organization, from people who are, like I said, both feet in, to people who are saying this is useless. I don't know why I would use this. They try it once and they say, nah, no, not for me. Not going to touch it again. If those results are good in the first place, people will have no choice but to start using it. So organized files are going to lead to accurate AI summaries and capture key insights. You're going to get better contextual information that guides those better outputs. Structured data is going to reduce the risk of hallucinations and misleading outputs. Clear headers, consistent formats, well-designed layouts. AI has less ambiguity to work with, which makes its recommendations more dependable. And centralized knowledge is great, not just for AI, but for your organization to stay more organized, to know where to find information, whether they're searching or going into the right folders there. And it gives the AI more of your organizational context. And so the key point here is that preparation doesn't make AI perfect, but it means that your output's a lot more likely to be trustworthy and usable. You're really reducing the rework, the efficiency, and accuracy, meaning, again, you'll see better uptake of these tools. And so talking about governance again, this is sort of from webinar 4 and 5, but it's about managing the content itself in this case. The document, spreadsheet, and slide that we've discussed, so AI has a reliable base to work from. And what I want you to leave here with is a sense of the long-term journey. This is work that everyone would have seen benefits from 5 years ago, but it's just more important now that we're inviting AI in. It doesn't have the context that lives in your head. You can underestimate how much small detail and organizational detail can impact the kinds of outputs that you're going to get. And so this is going to be a long-term journey. This isn't just a one-time thing. The first cleanup that you have is going to be the real challenging one, but after that you will need maintenance to make sure that this continues to work well. Regular audits are going to keep you consistently AI ready. You want to define your retention and archiving rules, and so outdated files will linger if you don't do something about them. And Microsoft recently started including some of these retention and labeling tools in Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which is the license you should be using at a minimum, so you can automate and simplify this. You want to create metadata and naming standards. I wish I could show you a little bit more of that SharePoint site without sort of revealing private information, but we have all of our data in a folder and it's tagged, and you can search for policies or procedures, and there's sort of a consistent structured way to access that data, which is useful for somebody who's looking for data manually, but again is going to make it even easier for the AI to interpret and understand and give accurate answers. And version control practices. Even if it's as simple as saying don't keep 15 versions of the same file, you need to actually explain this to people. I'm sure everybody here is guilty of this one way or another, but you want to make sure that you have version control so that authoritative documents are clearly distinguished from the working copies, and that AI can work with the accurate ones and not the 15 different versions with varying details in them. And so these are the kinds of governance practices that connect directly to what we covered today, keeping Word docs, Excel sheets, PowerPoint decks in structured, relevant, and reliable long term. On the next slide, we're going to translate these into a quick start checklist you can apply right away. Oh, I think we took that slide out. That does conclude basically the content we've got on the slides here today, but I will give you one more thing with this little Excel spreadsheet that I had. And this is what the paid Copilot license can do with some data. This is just fake example data that Microsoft gives you if you search for sample Excel spreadsheet. And oh, this is the wrong one. Hold on. Let's get the right one up. There it is. And so this is, lots and lots of data about our sales figure for a bunch of different products that we sell. And I can ask for, how many sale units do we typically sell in February? And anyone who's experienced with Excel knows you could do this with a pivot table as well, but this sort of lowers that barrier a bit, and you can ask more complex questions that would require a bunch of specific knowledge in order to get the data put together properly. Where are we here? So on average, about 1,400 Paseo units are sold in February. Another thing you can do is ask it to create a stacked line graph. That shows units sold by month separated by product type. And so again, if you're really experienced with Excel, these are all things that are a few clicks. They don't take that long, but it really closes the gap between having specific Excel knowledge and getting the types of things you couldn't do before, especially pivot tables. I think it's not too common to know how to use those things, but you can get that data back out. So it's going to show me what that stacked line graph looks like. And if I want to show this to my boss and look like I know what I'm doing, I can say, put it on a new sheet. And it looks like I'm an Excel expert. And you can even ask things like what country sells or buys the most Paseo units. Any other questions while we're just going through these things here? We got post here. Yep, a recording of this webinar will be available. I will ask our team to make sure that gets over to you there. And so this is just the last question I'm throwing out here. Canada buys the most Paseo units, the total of 78,000 units sold. And so you can kind of see this works within PowerPoint. It works within Word for analyzing documents. It can even generate content. Yes, you do have to pay extra for this feature. This is the Copilot license it's called Copilot for Microsoft 365, and it's about $50 a month with an annual commitment required for that one. That has access to your SharePoint data, and you get the ones that layer on top of the apps automatically. And the pay-as-you-go Copilot and Power Automate, could a beginner audit multiple SharePoint sites for duplicate docs? Potentially. It really depends on what you mean by beginner. It really, I wouldn't say that using Copilot exclusively is going to surface everything like without a lot of extra work, but it is possible. Power Automate would make it simpler and more repeatable. Beginner, maybe, but it's hard to say. There is tons and tons of training material available for both Copilot and Power Automate, though, within Microsoft Learn. So I would say as long as you've got the time and dedication, you absolutely could accomplish that. So I think that's all I have for today, unless there's any other questions that are out there, anything about Copilot or data governance, cleaning up your data. But